Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Dizon-Ross. I'm a researcher at Calder at AIR. Calder stands for the Center for Analysis of Longitudinal Data in Education Research. And I'm going to be presenting some results from the Road to Recovery project, specifically looking at interventions from ESSER Year 3, so from 2022 to 23 school year. Next slide, please. And next slide again. There, that's just me. So the Road to Recovery project is a research practice partnership is between Calder, NWA, and Harvard University, and most importantly, a coalition of districts from around the country. So throughout the course of the project, the number of districts has shifted a little bit, anywhere between 8 and 12. For the research that I'm going to be talking about today, we worked with 9 amazing districts. So Dallas, Guilford County Schools, Santa Ana, Portland, Tulsa, Richardson, Alexandria, Suffern, and Syracuse City. So we had an awesome group of people to work with, representing really diverse student bodies from around the country. Overall, the districts in our coalition have a higher percentage of free and reduced price eligible students and students of color than the national average. And as you can tell, just kind of by looking at it, they represent a really diverse set of circumstances and also geographically all around the country. So the project has been in place for about 3 years. In previous work, we've examined recovery interventions from 21-22 and summer 22. Like I said, I'm just going to be talking about 22-23 for this very short presentation. But in that school year, we analyzed several different types of interventions. And the whole idea of this was just to try to understand what is the effect of these recovery interventions on students in these districts, focusing on academic measures. So we looked at tutoring, small group interventions, out of school time programs, extended years, and expert teachers. As you can imagine, there was a lot of variety in how these programs were implemented. For any given one of those bullets, I'm sure everyone on this call knows there's dozens of different ways that you could implement that program. So we had interviews with each of the districts to really try to understand both the program design and then also the program implementation, because we all know a lot of times the design does not equal the implementation when you have to set up these programs, particularly at scale. By and large, all those types of programs that we looked at are aimed at increasing the amount of instructional time for students. The one exception there is expert teachers, which you might notice is a little bit of a different flavor of intervention. And I'll talk in a couple of minutes about sort of expert teachers separately. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to be talking through the effects that we found of tutoring and small group instruction. I will say that for extended year and out of school time programs, the takeaways were pretty much the same. And I'll walk through what's in these graphs, but just to give you guys the main takeaway is that most tutoring and small group instructional programs did not positively impact student test scores. And we used NWA MAP growth scores as sort of our outcome measure here. That said, there is some interesting nuance, so I want to go through it. So just so you can orient yourself to these graphs, on the left, we have math interventions. On the right, we have reading. We do anonymize the districts here. So there were 5 districts that implemented at least one type of math tutoring or small group program. And there were 6 districts that had at least one type of reading small group or math program. The gray dots are our point estimates, and the little blue bars are the confidence intervals. And at the top, we have the overall. So that's just sort of summarizing all the district programs beneath it. And you can see that by and large, we are not seeing statistically significant effects, particularly on the positive side. For all of these estimates, what we're thinking, the way we estimate it was using value-added models. So what we're doing is we're really comparing outcomes for observably similar students who did or did not participate in the program. Now, there are, you might notice, a few exceptions to this somewhat bleak picture. Thank you. And that would be a math tutoring and 2 reading tutoring interventions. And there are some things that really stand out about these. So overall, the average dosage, the overall amount of time students spent in these programs really range. So across all the districts, the average dosage was between 6 and 50 hours over the course of the year. Huge range. The participation rates also had a huge range. They were between 1% and 20% of students in eligible grades. So you see where we do find positive effects, these really stand out for their high dosage numbers and their low participation rates. And that's something that we thought was really notable. A lot of times these programs, one of the biggest challenges of them is scaling them up. And we see here sort of where districts have had success is where they actually kept things small and really focused on getting a lot of treatment to a smaller number of kids. Just so you know, the green diamonds in this graph shows what we would expect the effect of these programs to be if they had the same impact per hour as what research tells us about high dosage tutoring. So you'll see for these, it's actually quite similar, with one exception. The green diamond is quite a bit more than the gray dot, but it's kind of in the range of what you would expect from a high quality, high dosage tutoring program. And the difference really there is that they're able to provide that type of service to a smaller number of kids. Next slide. Okay, I just wanted to mention the expert teachers program because it is a little bit different from the others. So in one district, the struggling students were assigned to expert teachers, who are teachers with high evaluation scores, who are already employed by the district. So that's important. They weren't newly hired. Really what you had here was a shuffling of kids to the teachers based on their need. So sort of necessarily, kids who were not deemed high need did not have expert teachers. And that's sort of something to keep in mind when we think about the comparison. Again, unlike the other interventions, this program did not provide students with additional instructional time. It's just which teacher you had for your classroom. And here we did find positive effects for, again, students compared to observably similar students who did not have expert teachers. Both math and reading, we found positive effects. And if you could go one slide forward, yeah. So something to note here is that this is different from the other programs in that actually the participation rate, the number of students treated, was much higher. So we had 32% of students were treated with expert teachers in math, 20% of students were treated with expert teachers in ELA. So this kind of goes against the rule that I talked about a second ago with the programs. And again, it's a totally different type of program, but sort of, this is one district's kind of creative way of trying to really serve the needs of students who had been hurt by the pandemic. Next slide. So just to summarize our takeaways, scale matters for impact, but there may be some exceptions. So again, overall, we did not find measurably positive impacts of these programs on students, which is obviously a bit of a bummer, but it is really interesting to note that programs with high dosage and a small number of targeted recipients did seem to have some real benefits for students. So these findings suggest that there's really a trade-off here between scale and impact when it comes to academic recovery. And that was very important for districts to wrestle with, obviously, when there was a lot of funding, when ESSER was still widely available. Now that those dollars are going away, it becomes even more important and relevant for districts to wrestle with. And again, one district's expert teachers program provides a promising and different type of approach to improving outcomes for struggling students. Next slide. And I will just briefly say that this work is still ongoing. So we are currently wrapping up our analysis of summer 2023 interventions, and then also looking at several years of interventions, their impact on non-test outcomes. So looking at attendance, discipline, and course grades. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to share those results with you all soon.
Thank you so much. We have time for one question. So how did your team share these findings back with the district, or how do you plan to share them back with the districts? And if you did have a chance to share them, how did they help kind of shape their planning or thinking around some of these interventions?
Yeah, great question. So for each district, we create sort of a PowerPoint report that we try to make very user-friendly and accessible. And we meet with each district and sort of walk through the report with them to share what we've learned about participation and dosage and impact estimates. And we really try to make it a conversation so that our contacts at the district, which normally involves folks from the research evaluation team, and then also directors of tutoring or director of summer school, whichever we're looking at, can react and sort of help explain things we find or sort of like have a discussion amongst themselves. It really varies across districts how they use this information. Some are surprised, some totally are like, yes, that's what we expected to see. But a lot of times it helps them kind of zero in on the implementation challenges, which they have a sense of, but don't have data to back up, so that they can inform how they want to shift the sort of design and implementation of their programs for the next year. But again, like it really does vary across districts, but we try to make it as sort of usable for them as possible.